25th, 1950. Many political conflicts have been arising between North and South Korea. North Korea took matters into its own hands and sent its forces across the 38th parallel and invaded South Korea in an attempt to reunify Korea. The South, assisted by the United Nations, and the North, assisted by the USSR, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. The North pushed the South to the bottom of the Korean peninsula, followed by the South pushing the North to the border of China. China got scared that the battle would reach Chinese soils and interfered, pushing United Nations forces back to the 38th parallel.
The Korean conflict was a big contributor to the Cold War and many present-day conflicts. Before the start of the Korean conflict, many nations of Asia were rebuilding after World War II. Many businesses were in debt and the economy was still recovering. The spread of communism, a belief that all property belongs to a government and everyone is treated financially equally, concerned many U.S. citizens. The U.S. was Republican, a form of government with elected representatives that vote on issues, bills, and decisions. Americans feared that if communism becomes the official political belief of a nation, neighboring nations will be influenced. This was referred to as the domino theory. The Korean War was the first domino.
Years before the Korean War in 1945, the USSR had declared war on the Japanese Empire. Japan at the time controlled Korea. The USSR seized control of Japan with the help of the US and liberated Korea. For the US had already claimed the South, the USSR and the US decided to split Korea and draw a border between the two nations called the 38th parallel. The USSR and the US left Korea, but their influences stayed. The North remained communist and the South Republican. Eventually, a North Korean politician named Kim Il-sung came into power in North Korea. Kim Il-sung believed in unification through conflict and not compromise.
Tension grew between the USSR and the US. The US viewed the USSR and communism as a threat. President Harry S. Truman claimed every time a nation becomes communist, another would be influenced. Truman was dedicated to stopping communism. He said that the USSR was taking over the world with every country that becomes communist. This was how he scared the US public. Truman presented the domino theory to scare US citizens.
The communists in the Kremlin are engaged in a monstrous conspiracy to stamp out freedom all over the world.
The North crossing the 38th parallel and pushing the South to the brink of the peninsula caused many South Koreans to flee south. The North would kill anyone who defied them. Some South Koreans attempted to fight back, but would just end up dead in the end. Just as it seemed there was no hope for South Korea, the UN stepped in. During the heat of the Korean conflict, many nations debated on the use of nuclear weapons. This is where China became involved. Mao Zedong, a communist Chinese leader, was hesitant to enter the Korean War. Mao thought that the US would use nuclear weapons on Chinese forces and industrial centers if they interfered. Mao believed this because he knew that the US public wanted nuclear weapons to be used, even on the innocent. Despite that possible outcome, Joseph Stalin, leader of the USSR, had urged Mao to get involved. Some Chinese officials argued that China had just fought its own civil war and that it wouldn't be a good idea to interfere and lose resources. This had stirred controversy amongst the people of China. Eventually, Stalin convinced Mao to take action, and China sent 130,000 Chinese People's Volunteers across the Chinese border into Korea to aid the communist regime. US citizens, on the other hand, feared that if the US were to use nuclear weapons on Chinese, USSR, and North Korean forces, the USSR would use nuclear weapons against the US. This sparked controversy amongst the leaders of the USSR, China, and the UN. Many US citizens supported the idea of nuclear weapons during the Korean conflict. One major icon that supported the use of nuclear weapons was General Douglas MacArthur, a 5-star general of the US.
MacArthur had already built a good reputation amongst the US, being a successful general in World War II. MacArthur was also involved in the Battle of Incheon, an important battle to the Korean War, fought in Incheon, South Korea. The Battle of Incheon could not have been done without aircrafts. Violence through air was the superpower of the century. Aircrafts dominated in battles. Most battles in the war involved air tactics. Many soldiers had to look out for enemy aircraft and would strike them down with guns such as F-80 jet shooting stars. The Battle of Incheon was no exception to air tactics. MacArthur had a strategy to land UN forces behind enemy lines, but the Pentagon opposed him. MacArthur did not care what the Pentagon thought and proceeded with his plot. First, a wave of aircrafts carried over Incheon and landed UN troops behind enemy lines, while the 1st Cavalry attacked from the other side and distracted North Korean forces. In the end, MacArthur and the US were successful in the Battle of Incheon, pushing Northern forces out of Incheon. However, he was relieved of his power due to making public statements about the Truman administration which were contrary to the administration's policies. This is what Truman had to say.
My fellow Americans, I want to talk to you plainly tonight about what we're doing in Korea and about our policy in the Far East. In the simplest terms, what we're doing in Korea is this: we are trying to prevent a third world war.
July 27, 1953. The US and the USSR were worn out and running low on resources from all the fighting, and a compromise has been made, and a truce, stating that both sides were to put to an end to all the conflict, has been signed, and both sides of Korea have ceased fire. The Korean conflict has halted, and a peace has been made. For now. The Korean conflict marked the beginning of the Cold War, a series of wars and conflicts such as the Vietnamese War, the Korean War, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. All events were involved with America's despise for communism and the USSR. Nuclear weapons were also a big part of the Cold War, causing both the US and the USSR to be afraid of each other. These led to them taking action. The Korean War is still a big part of the present-day conflict between the US and North Korea. The current relation between North Korea and the US is a mutual hate relation with much tension. In August 1976, a fight between US soldiers and North Korean officers broke out. US soldiers wanted to cut trees for land, while North Koreans claimed that to be illegal. This led to court cases and more bloodshed. More smaller and frequent incidents like these turned into even bigger and worse problems between the US, North Korea, and South Korea. An incident, although not involving the US, happened on November 28, 1987, when a Korean airliner with 100 passengers exploded over the Bay of Bengal. No survivors. It was later discovered that 2 North Korean terrorists planted bombs on the plane, causing more tension and hate between the two Koreas.
The Korean conflict was the first domino of the Cold War, which led to past and present-day conflicts between Russia and the US. Although a compromise was made to halt the fighting, the Korean War was not officially ended, and the conflict could begin to escalate once more. North Korea has slowly become fascist, a government controlled by one person. Kim Jong-un, the current leader of North Korea, is testing nuclear weapons, and the US is on the verge of war with North Korea. However, Russia does not support the North any longer. The forgotten war should no longer be forgotten.